Today I want to show you how I shot a conceptual photography project and look at the results together because I think they are quite interesting because I shot 2 rolls of expired film.
There is a light under my skin. I'm running on crack. So tell me you miss it. I'll chase all that.
So this story begins a couple months ago when I felt the urge to create a conceptual photography project. I don't know where this urge came from, I just had an atmosphere and some images floating around in my head that felt like I needed to realize, and so whenever I had time I just worked on a little concept that I wanted to make, and I ended up making a mood board and all sorts of things like that, and also a document that describes the piece that I'm trying to make. So this here is the document I made. It's just a map, actually, a map of my thoughts and a couple images just to, bring across the mood. So yeah, a map of my thoughts, some mood boards, and the last page is just a gear list so that I know what I need. And that's it. In the meanwhile, I also contacted a friend who had recently found an interest in modelling, and so I thought maybe he would be a good fit to work with me on this project. And so yes, for a change, this is a project that I'm not tackling alone. And luckily, he was very excited to participate, and so later on we met and just discussed the project further and also made some outfit decisions. One last thing I needed before we could start shooting was some film. The project is called Deterioration and should capture the feeling and atmosphere of human deterioration in more of a personal and mental manner, not physical aging. As you saw in the mood boards, it's going to go into the direction of a subject in solitude on the verge of collapse. I decided to split the concept in 3 chapters: life, death, and afterlife, which will each have slightly varying visual language. The first chapter, Life, shows the protagonist on the verge of collapse. Then everything flashes, goes dark, comes back and fades again. That's the part I want to cover in chapter 2, Death. And after that calms down and the colours fade away, the protagonist continues their existence in the quiet of numbness, but also dullness. The final interpretation of what these should express or evoke resides in the viewer, of course. Anyway, I was talking about the necessary film. So originally I was considering to shoot this project digitally, but then I got too hooked on the idea that it would be much more fitting to shoot this project on expired film. In case you don't know, film can expire. The chemicals on the film lose sensitivity over time, and once it's expired, the film manufacturer cannot guarantee the usual results. Especially when film is expired for a long time, this can lead to interesting effects such as colour shifts or unnatural contrast. It looks a bit like underexposed film but with more spice and better. And so I had to go on a hunt for my expired film, and so I turned to my beloved second-hand online market here in Austria, Wilhelm. This is the place where you can find anything and everything from the most basic second-hand items such as clothes to the more niche, sometimes even weird items. I found a couple posts which looked promising, but there was one that stood out. The seller had a whole collection of all sorts of expired films. I believe the post had over 40 images. I contacted the seller and we agreed to meet in town. That meeting was quite funny actually, because we decided to meet in front of the McDonald's in the middle of Vienna, and he came with that box of his and we just went around the corner and crouched there to dig into that box of expired film, and he really did have a wonderful collection. And so I took my time and ended up choosing, I think it was 7 rolls, which he then sold to me for a pretty good price. And it was only later that I realised that I had accidentally chosen a roll that I didn't plan on taking, and that was a roll of Fujichrome 100 slide film. The reason why I didn't actually want to take that film is because it was slide film, and slide film is known to be harder to shoot than negatives. And so for this project, choosing slide film, which I have, by the way, never shot before, that expired 30 years ago in 1993, yes, that is 30 years ago, that felt a little risky, but I thought now I have it anyway, so why not just do it? And so equipped with that expired film, I made a date with Phil to shoot, and we did it.
I'm moving on and on and on. I'm moving on and on. I'm moving on. I'm moving on.
Today Today we are shooting a conceptual photography project. This is Phil. He's helping me out today. He's going to be in front of the camera so that I can fully concentrate on being behind the camera, unlike usual when I run in front of the camera. We've come out here to the edge of Vienna at some fields. The weather is not quite what we were hoping for. I was hoping that it would be much greyer and more of a gloomy day. We've got a little bit of sun and we'll work with it anyway. I'm excited. How do you feel?
Amazing, I'm so excited.
Alright, so I'll be scouting the first shots, but we'll start with this chair that I'm sitting on and I'll just be documenting everything. Let's go! So the first issue we ran into was that the weather was not exactly what I was hoping for. I'm afraid the forecast once again proved its unreliability. But then the next issue I had was that it was just way too bright to shoot at low apertures and low shutter speeds, even though one of the films I was shooting is that expired roll of Fujichrome 100, which I rated at ISO 25. The other film, an expired roll of Fuji Superior 200, I rated at ISO 50. The first couple of shots though, I shot at a lower aperture with the maximum shutter speed to freeze the falling motion of Phil. The first shots I got were a full body sort of environmental portrait type shot of Phil on the chair. Vom Kopf war grad gut eigentlich mit dem Hängen, aber schau dahin, an mir vorbei. Nicht ganz so weit rüber, nur so knapp an mir vorbei. Ja. Wenn ich nicht weiß, wie viele Stops ich gerade underexpose. Will ich dasselbe Bild dann einmal noch mit dem machen? Den Kopf noch einen Ticken wieder nach oben bringen, genau. Danke. After that, we switched it up a little bit. I asked Phil to stand next to the chair and fall, as if the chair was pulling him into it. My goal was to freeze that moment of falling before his reflexes catch him. Genau. Ich zähle am besten das Bild dann runter, dann kannst du dich ein bisschen vorlehnen, damit wir quasi diesen Moment fangen, kurz bevor du umkippst und dann kannst du dich fangen. Also wenn das von deinem Fuß her auch geht.
So meinst du dann?
Genau.
Okay, ja,
dass wir genau diesen Moment erwischen, wo du in dieser Luft quasi
und dann
schwebst.
Sozusagen aufstützen am Stuhl.
3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1. So let's have a look at these first results. I was shooting each photo with both films to be safe because I had no idea whether the Fujichrome 100 roll would even be usable. This is the first composition I got. I got it twice, which however aren't really different from another that much. The angle on the second one is a bit better though. I'm really happy with this first shot actually. This wide style of composing the subject is quite down my alley, as you probably know, and I think it works wonderfully. The lighting turned out better than I expected. While shooting, I felt like it was going to look horrible, but it's okay actually. Just the sky is completely blown out without any details, which in hindsight, however, doesn't even look too bad because it kind of fits the theme of the shoot. When it comes to these shots of Phil falling over, I'm quite happy. I'm fond of the pose that we could create by having Phil literally fall in front and freezing that motion. By the way, the colours of these results from the expired roll of Fuji Superior 200 are slightly edited. I basically tried to push for the look I was going for with a colder white balance setting and a greener tint than what would be close to accurate. And then here is the same shot but on Fujichrome 100, and I am amazed by the result. I was not at all sure what I was going to get, but this here is wonderful. It's basically a hazier, greener version with less detail. Fitting the theme of deterioration, this does look like a deteriorated version of the same shot. I'm so glad I accidentally bought that roll. After those, I got closer to Phil to shoot some photographs of his face and upper body, but in a similar fashion with the motion of him falling into the chair. By the way, the order in which I shot these, and the order in which I intend to sequence the final series are not connected. This is the first of a couple shoots, and I believe the best sequence is to be found in the selecting and editing process after, just so you know. So this video is a bit like a work in progress video in which I show you all the shots, also the ones that might be left out in the final series.
Dieses Gefühl von einem ganz langen Tag ins Bett zu fallen, mehr oder weniger.
So I got a couple shots at 1,000th of a second to freeze the motion and a close-up of his upper body. However, I then decided to close the aperture to f16 or f22 even, to be able to lower the shutter speed to a point that I can create a decent amount of motion blur. Alright, so let's have a look at the results, starting off with the roll of Fuji Superior 200. The first shot, in which I froze Phil's motion, sadly didn't work out so well. The falling motion, or the moment of landing, seems to create interesting expressions, but in total this is not what I was going for. However, the upper body shot is pretty cool, I think. It pictures the reason for this shot quite well. I got it because I like the open and somewhat defeated body position of Phil, and this photograph puts a lot of emphasis on just that. And then I'm happy I decided to get the previous shots again, but with a lower shutter speed, because that is exactly what I was looking for. At first I was skeptical because I rarely shoot with such high apertures and thought that would mess up the result because I didn't want everything to be sharp. However, at the time I didn't realize that the motion blur of course replaces the lens blur in this case, and that these shots totally work. This one didn't work so well because, as you can see, I didn't move the camera enough to properly blur the background. However, the next one is splendid. I think the twisting motion that is captured in the shape of the motion blur makes this wonderful. And then here are the same shots but with the other film. I ended up always getting the same shots simply because I didn't know whether this roll would give me anything at all. I must say, overall, I think I prefer these because I love the hazy, unsharp look the expiration of this roll produced. However, for this shot, I think I nailed the twisting motion the best on the other roll. Next, I decided to move to the bushes here to continue shooting with the low shutter speeds and have Phil run. We talked and rehearsed the running for quite some time to really be on the same page. I had a lot of fun actually directing again. It's been a while that I did this and I wasn't feeling very confident, but all the conversations that I had with Phil prior to the shoot made the environment a comfortable one, so that I quickly found my confidence at the shoot and felt good in what I was telling him to do. The thing is, I don't really know how other photographers direct their models. I believe my method is a bit different maybe, because I basically directed Phil in a pretty similar way to the actors and actresses I've worked with in my time in uni when I studied film and directed a couple short films. I took the lessons that I had learned from film directing and vaguely applied them to photography. So I spoke to Phil more in feelings that I wanted him to convey and let him come up with facial expressions and poses, which I then further tweaked with more comments on how much tension or relaxation I want, or what else he could try with his arms.
Ja, dieses Alarmierte mit den Händen nach oben, das kam, glaube ich, gerade einfach aus der Natürlichkeit.
Voll, ja.
Das brauchen wir.
Okay.
So machen wir das nochmal. Gleich nochmal. Okay. Yes.
Ja?
Ja. 15. Gut, dann einmal an mir vorbei. Yes. Gleich nochmal. Bleib in deiner Anstrengung. Und anytime.
So, I got a couple shots of this running scene here, let's check them out. Again, let's start with the roll of Fuji Superior. The first attempt is going in the right direction, but it's a bit too messy and lacking in direction. The second one is interesting, however, I think it could need some more motion, and luckily while shooting I got a similar feeling, and so I tried a panning motion as Phil ran past me. This looks much better in my opinion. It's more telling than the first attempts. It doesn't feel as still, which in this case suits the photo better, I think. This is the last one and the best one of these I find. I love how this photo is somewhat clear so that you can see Phil's facial expression and movement, but at the same time everything seems to melt together in motion blur. The Fujichrome shots are very similar except for this second shot, which turned out vastly different from the second shot of the other roll, and I love how this shot turned out. I must admit, I don't really know how this happened. There's some motion in the camera that created these highlights that kind of resemble sparkles, and then in the middle is Phil's head turning in motion as he looks behind him. This is of course a lucky shot, seeing as the two motions just work together harmoniously, which is hard to control and mostly based on chance, I think. The last two shots also turned out good in my opinion. I especially like this one, which has the right balance of motion blur so that everything melts together but the subject is still clearly recognizable. Also, I'm fond of the composition in this one, how Phil only takes up the left half, looking back into the edge of the frame, and then the blurry empty space to the right of him makes the rest of the frame. Then, for some time, I wasn't that inspired anymore, mainly because the weather was just not what I was aiming for, and I of course didn't know that the results were turning out alright nevertheless. But before moving on to our second location, I did want to get one more composition, and so I sat Phil on the chair again and got out my wide-angle lens for the Pentax. Because I only have this 18 to 28mm lens for the Pentax, I only got these shots with the roll of Fujichrome. However, I don't want to stay on these for too long because they aren't that interesting. They seem to fall out of line with what I had been making so far, and I feel like they don't really fit so well in the series. It's nice that I got them, but I don't think they'll end up in the end result, but I guess that's part of the process. However, I do have a tendency of changing my mind after a month or so who knows, we'll see.
Seems like just the other day I'd see your face and know what to say. Now I'm staring at the ground, stepping over eggshells spread all around.
Anyway, after that we packed our stuff and moved to the second location, which is a riverbank where I had a couple more ideas. I still had some remaining flowers from that shoot a few weeks ago, which I intended to use as props again in this shoot. By now they had aged quite a bit, which of course suited this shoot perfectly. The first shot I wanted to get was of Phil lying on the ground with the flowers sprinkled across his body.
Bisschen aufmachen, wie es vorhin war, aber eher an mir vorbei. Ja, genau, so da in den Runden schauen. Alright.
These turned out pretty cool, I think. I got two angles at first, showing the scene from a slightly lower perspective. I like the atmosphere this scene evokes. While some might interpret this as a sleeping body, others might connect this photograph more with death, which I think are both valid. I also got this detail shot of his arm, which I particularly enjoy. I love how the light gently wraps around his arm. Then here are the same shots, but shot on Fujichrome. I must say, the look of this roll just suits these pictures so well. I'm so happy with these results. However, I got a different detail shot, I don't remember why though. Instead of photographing his arm again, I pictured his upper body with all the flowers sprinkled on top. Something I like about these flowers is the contrast. They give off a feeling of dirt, however at a closer glance you see that the dirt are actually flowers and that emits a sense of beauty.
Dann einmal die Hand reinlegen. Und ich komme mit den Blumen ein bisschen weiter rein. Also vom Arm her, genau.
Then I had one more scene left that I wanted to star Phil in. I had him lie next to the water and had his hand sink into it. Then I spread some flowers across the hand and the scene was ready to be shot.
Nur, dass du Bescheid weißt, ich nehme jetzt nochmal deinen ganzen Körper mit, wie du da liegst. Vielleicht streckst du dieses Bein noch aus. Ja, genau so.
Now let's go over this set of photographs, starting off with the detail shot of the hand in the water. I love how this turned out. The water being clear and quite shallow looks amazing, I find, because you can see the ground, which looks somewhat rotten in a way, which suits the theme of this shoot so well. The hand with the flowers then adds the needed point of focus, and I think in total this combination goes together splendidly. Then I walked a couple steps away to get Phil's upper body into frame, and I'm so happy with this result. I'm fond of the scene we came up with and how the shots emit a weird sense of tranquility, but also a cold uneasiness. Then it was only while shooting that I spontaneously decided to step away even further to get Phil's entire body into frame, and I'm so happy I did. I love how the subject and the environment are balanced out here and both contribute to the scene. Something that becomes apparent in this composition is that maybe shooting this in winter was a good decision, because here you can see the trees on the other side of the water in the river's reflection. As you can see, they are all still leafless, which also conveys a sense of lifelessness, a deteriorated look, which obviously adds to the scene. Then here are the same shots but on Fujichrome, and for these I'm actually not sure which version I prefer. So far I mostly preferred the look of Fujichrome, but here I'm so happy with the previous shots that these don't feel much better. They're more stylized of course, but not as cold as the results from the Fuji Superior roll, which is something I miss here. I guess this will need some time and I will find my answer later in the process. To finish the shoot, I got some more shots of just the flowers because I like the way they floated on top of the water. So here are the final shots. I like the cold look of the Fuji Superior shots so much, but also the more dirty looking shots of the flowers from the roll of Fujichrome. I think this combination of the flowers in the water in focus and the tree branches in the reflection works so nicely. Anyway, that wraps up this first shoot for my conceptual photography project I'm currently working on. I have to say, this start is better than what I had expected, and I look forward to continue working on this series. I hope you enjoyed coming along and seeing the process. Before saying goodbye, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the lovely Patreon community that is supporting me. Thank you so much. If you're interested in extra videos, Lightroom presets, or physical postcards, you can check out my page via the link in the description. That's it for this week, and I shall see you again soon. Until then, goodbye.